I'm so happy to say to those of us who have made it to day 5 of this 30-day challenge, well done this week, everybody. If you're watching this recording, we're just really over the moon by how much engagement. We're near 10,000 action steps in 5 days, which means you're playing the game. And I think that we couldn't have 2 better guests on our first Friday Zoom call than Paul and Lauren to discuss a little bit more about how we can play this game potentially a little bit more with a little more awareness, being a little bit more embodied. And so we're thrilled to have Lauren and Paul. Lauren, if you just real quick, if you could just give us a little, summary of your experience and how you found your way into mindfulness practice.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Dr. Lauren Borden. I am an executive coach and researcher, mindfulness researcher. So my background is actually in a very specific field that almost no one's ever heard of, called industrial organizational psychology. So I've spent the last 10 or so years really studying people at work and how to support them in being really maximizing their productivity. But not only that, but really their happiness and satisfaction with their work. And so my journey with mindfulness really was a personal one where for the majority of my life, I was very much kind of an overachiever and really interested in maximizing my performance. But I had really, really bad anxiety, really had a hard time focusing, things like that, and found my way to something called Vipassana meditation that completely changed the course of my life and just the way that I operate. So now I'm also a mindfulness instructor, in addition to doing the research that I did through graduate school, kind of applying it there. I did my dissertation on it. And now I actually teach mindfulness to my clients, and I teach courses on it, and really with an emphasis on practical application, because I really do believe that it's the basis of being able to make other really large changes that really impact your life, just like in a seismic way. So that's my background, and coming active from Florida. So.
That's amazing. And that's, that's why it's so appropriate to have you on right now. Our first week of this course is really centered around presence. And I think we may be aligned in that sense that to really make real change, we have to take a real look at where we are in our moment. And, I think it's really quick and fleeting for people to think about, kind of projecting out in the future with their goals and their aspirations, or kind of wrestling with the things from their past. Where change really happens is in the present moment. And so I think that your expertise and your wisdom and your life experience is going to be really helpful for our group here. Paul, give us a little rundown as to, how did you, I think you had mentioned that you are trained in TM and also in heart math. Those are 2 things that I think are really fascinating for myself, and I think the group as well. Tell us a little bit about your story.
Absolutely. So, my background, I actually former military, and I was an educator for maybe 5 or 6 years, and so I got really interested in human development, several years ago, maybe 25 years ago, and as I transitioned out of education and went into IT. Of course, I was in the corporate world, and of course, I had the opportunity to have the experience of wanting to perform and excel and kind of go up the ladder. And then starting to watch all the burnout just happen, just left and right, no matter what industry we were in, but just particularly in the IT field, just folks getting in the leadership world and just burning out very quickly. And then I had the same experience maybe a little over 10 years ago. And so I I decided to get into the executive coaching and facilitation, and that world for me got really exciting. I started looking at a field called neuro leadership, which is kind of what got me interested in coaching, but coaching from more of a science-based perspective and integrating positive psychology, mindfulness, emotional, social intelligence, relational intelligence, all that kind of stuff. And quantum theory, that was also another interest and passion. And so I got introduced to heart math in this process of coaching and working with folks and trying to help them become better, perform better. And heart math was kind of like this epiphany for me, having been military and having understood and experienced PTSD, being in the first Gulf War. And I learned a lot of tools and a lot of science around how to manage the physiology to be able to have an impact on what's going on cognitively, so cognitive performance, right? And of course, learning all the health benefits that go along with that as well, but certainly understanding how I was not a slave to those particular moments, but I could certainly change my response to that. And over time, I could build more emotional resilience, if you will. And so heart math was really interesting. And then, as part of heart math, I started looking at mindfulness and understanding the science behind that. And I, dabbled around in different areas. I took some mindfulness trainings. One of the things we do with my company is kind of like Lauren, we teach mindfulness. We also teach the resilience, the coherence techniques that heart math teach. And then maybe 2.5 years ago, I got on this quest on purpose and thinking about who am I, what am I here to do, how am I really supposed to serve? And the message I got back was you have to be more integrative, you have to be more holistic about everything you do when you're working with people. And so I went down this path of personal training. I went down the path of functional medicine coaching. I went down all these different paths. And then I got to meditation. And I've been doing mindfulness meditation for about 4.5, 5 years. But I felt like my practice wasn't where it needed to be, even I'm teaching this, right? And so I had been interested in transcendental meditation for a while, but never really took the step because I didn't understand it. And once I, pulled back the covers and went to a meeting and had a conversation and learned a little bit more about it and started learning the research, I was like, oh my God, how come I haven't done this a long time ago? And I think, for me, it was the formalized training was kind of what made that permanent for me, is as far as this is going to be a practice now, because you got formalized training, you got folks that are going to support you. And I just jumped in with both feet, without any expectation. And, it's been a great journey so far. And I'm just continuing to go down that rabbit hole to learn as much as I can about transcendental meditation itself, but also learning about myself and kind of, who I'm evolving into. And so it's just been a great experience. And I would share with everyone that, if you can get a formalized training practice, I don't care which one it is, but, for some people that makes all the difference in the world. The apps are great, but, sometimes we need a little bit more. And for me, that was the answer.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. At some point, I want to hear a little bit more about Vipassana and TM as practices, because I feel like that they're on the same tree, but maybe on different branches in some regard. And I think from a mindfulness perspective, it's really, generic in a lot of ways to think about mindfulness, pay attention, non-judgmentally, just observe. What are sort of the early onboarding lessons that you would, kind of unpack if you're working with an executive team or an individual around just the concept of mindfulness? And what are some of the ways and effective strategies that you've shown over your time in this field to really land with people on a level that maybe they don't know a lot about mindfulness practice? Where do you enter in? What's your entry point?
Great question. So it really depends a little bit on the person, but I think usually I tend to start very broadly. Like I think it's really important because a lot of people start this work and might have a fair amount of resistance to it, or all this stuff comes up around, I don't know if I'm doing it right, my mind's not getting quiet, like you hear all the typical things. So I think when you deal with those things, it's very important to have a basis of an understanding of why you're doing it. And really starting there. So I especially with executives and in organizations, we need to understand it first to be able to have it sink in. Like that's kind of the doorway. And so that's one piece, is that like for you, if it's understanding, I think also knowing yourself, what do you need to know about this practice for you to be excited about it? Is it the impact on your attention, on your relationships, on your connection with yourself? Getting really clear on like, why are you doing it? And second, starting small. So, there are certain people who, like, I was someone who had never meditated, and I immediately went on a 10-day silent meditation retreat. I actually don't recommend that for most people. I tend to like go, I'm doing it, I'm going in. Some people are like that, but most people, it's like, I don't even know where to start. So really what I tell people is that, so some research has actually shown that 3 minutes of meditation can actually change your brainwaves. So if you can just get on your pillow, get to your meditation pillow or wherever it is that you're doing meditation for 3 minutes a day, start with that. Because I think for some people, we say do 30 minutes or do 15 minutes even, and they kind of cringe or they feel like they have a hard time fitting it in. If you can even just get in the habit of doing it for 3 minutes a day and maintain that for a while and then incrementally increase, it makes it so much more accessible. And you'll actually form the habit before you talk yourself out of it. So I think those are kind of the two pieces. Understand why, start small. But Paul, I'm curious to hear your perspective.
Thank you, Lauren.
Yeah, I agree. Certainly, the why is probably the most important thing, because that's going to get them motivated to continue to try it. Meditation. I think too is that I kind of share what meditation is not. And a lot of people have these expectations that meditation is going to change them or going to make them be this guru who's got to sit on a rock or something. And what does that really mean? If I'm meditating, how people are going to look at me? And starting small, 3 minutes, that's spot on. I certainly agree with that. I think also too with them is, they get worried about, I can't stop my mind from going, right? And it's like, your mind is doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing. And so it's not about stopping your mind. It's allowing your mind to go where it needs to go without judging it, letting it go, and when you notice that, go back to wherever you were focusing. If it's your breath, then it's your breath. If it's a spot on the wall, then it's a spot on the wall. But your mind's going to do that. So it's not about controlling the mind. It's about noticing when you're not putting your attention where it's supposed to go, right? Because a lot of people give up when they say, I can't stop my mind, so I can't do this. And it's like, well, no, you're doing exactly what you're doing exactly where you're putting your attention. So if you want to be frustrated, you can put your attention on frustration. Or if you want to just put your attention on your breath, then you can do that. And things come in and they come out, and it's okay. You notice it, go back to your breath, and forgive yourself or just let it go if your attention goes away. And 3 minutes is all it takes. And so, yeah, I kind of approach it the same way.
And Paul, if I could just build off of that one thing, I can't remember who told me this or if I read it, but because I also have very similar things where people will say, like, I couldn't get my mind to settle down, I don't know. And there's this I think it's a famous teacher, actually. I think I read this in a book, but he said, if you have a whole meditation sitting and you are able to direct your attention back to the focal point one time, that is a successful sitting.
Yep.
Even if you just do it once.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So really what you're sort of reframing, how we create narrative around what we find successful, scaling it in a way that allows people to find success in a small amount of time. 3 minutes, we can do anything for 3 minutes, typically. Where do you find in your practices that this, once people sort of kind of buy into that and start to do that 3 minutes, understand the why, start small, when does it start to kind of grip them and sort of become a bit more habitual? I don't wake up in the morning and use willpower to brush my teeth. I get up and that's just the thing that I do. And I notice as a mindfulness, practitioner myself, that it's just embedded into my life now in a way that it's not separate. I guess 2 questions. One is what's some of the narrative that people can use with themselves, or how would you coach somebody through trying to build this practice into their lives a little bit more? And then what have you seen based on your experience for people to say, oh my gosh, Lauren, now I just do it. I don't even think about it anymore.
Yeah. Paul, you want to go first on this one?
Yeah, take this one, Paul.
Sure. So I think, I mean, there's two things. We try to get people first to understand the entire habit building process, like learning something new, and then of course you going through the stages of learning. Even with this, it's knowing that first you don't have a lot of understanding about it. So so first you just need to try. That's the first step, is try. If you can build a certain schedule around it. So for example, if you can meditate at the same time, even if it's 3 minutes, and you're going to wake up and you can do it at 7 o'clock. Right, in the morning. Okay, well, let's try for 3 minutes at 7 a.m. And then it's more about trying to stay consistent with the schedule, and checking in. And if you miss, it's okay. Forgive yourself, and and come back to it again the next day. The other thing is, people will sometimes say, well, some of my meditations are really good and some of them aren't great at all. I have my mind's run all over the place. That's okay, right? Because tomorrow's a new day, or this evening is another time to try it again. But it's more about trying to implement some consistency, and sometimes wrapping it around a time, and having multiple ways to remind yourself, whether it's visually or auditorily or whatever it is, but having ways to remind yourself that, hey, you know what, this is the moment that you need to take a breath, or 5, right? And that's all you need to do. And once you build consistency, when I'm coaching someone around that, around 2-3 weeks when they've been consistent, what have you noticed? And typically they've noticed, I haven't been as quick to jump, in situations where I have been before. And like once they make a connection to where they see a difference, then that's when it's okay. Now I see why I'm doing this, and now I can see the results of that. But it takes someone putting a lot of attention on it. Like they have to intentionally want to do it and be trying to do it. It's not like you do it 1,000 times and it just happens automatically. That's a kind of a myth out there. It's 1,000 times rule. It's how much attention in intentionality you're putting on that. So it's intention and attention at the same time. So
That's great. Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. I also loved how meta you got there. You were like, we're bringing mindfulness to the mindfulness. Make sure you're being mindful of how the but I think that's absolutely it. Being aware. So first off, I'd say in my experience, it takes about 3 to 4 weeks for people to really build a habit around it. And in my practice, one of the things that I do is very similar. It's like, what are you noticing? Actually bringing some intentionality around looking at how it's impacting things that you might not be thinking. So reactivity time, how centered you are for the rest of your day. Where I actually find the most bang for, our buck though, tends to be when they do it for a period of time and then they start missing a few days. Is that suddenly they'll go, oh man, I just had a series of really, like, what's off? Oh, I didn't get my meditation in today. And so almost I don't encourage like failure, and I don't really consider it to be failure, but like actually experimenting and seeing what shifts, and having also set places where to look. So for me, one of the go-to things is like reactivity with a loved one, or react to like what knowing what your triggers are. And even if you just get an extra split second where you go, oh, that's that thing that normally sets me off, but I'm actually not going to do that here. I'm going to do something else, is a huge win. And it's something that most people glaze over, and they don't actually realize that that's mindfulness. That's actually what's happening in the moment. Also, I think like the one iteration I would sort of add also on what Paul said, because I think it's so important to include it as part of your morning routine, because it really sets the day. Like that first hour, and I'm sure you all have been talking about this, because I know I am somewhat familiar with what you've been doing in this group, but that first hour or so of your day, even 30 minutes, 15 minutes, is so pivotal in setting the tone for the rest of your day. So if you can do it in the morning, that's great. And I think also knowing yourself. So I have kind of 2 sets of clients, I'm creating a false dichotomy here a little bit, but my clients tend to come in kind of 2 buckets. One is the overachiever who's like, go, 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 who's going to use the meditation as a place to beat themselves up. And for them, I'm like, I'll say, okay, this is, create a menu for yourself of mindfulness-based activities. And instead of being like, it has to be this perfect thing that happens every single day, let's create a little bit of flexibility. so that you can actually listen to yourself and ask yourself what you need today. And that's usually a little bit after they've kind of gotten in the habit and like have some facility with it. But then there are the people who just like have a hard time with structure in general. And it's like they have a hard time, like they don't have a hard time being self-starters. And for them, I'm like, okay, like have that, let's actually play with the structure and like have you see it through. And I think a lot of that is knowing for yourself where your edge is. Is this going to be something that's just like, if I fail at, I'm going to be beating myself up with it. And like, how can I be about that in a way that's a little bit more productive? And tweaking it. Cause I think also everyone's routine will look a little bit different though generally I'm a big proponent of mornings for sure.
Right. Well, and that feeds nicely to where we are in our course as well, where we've had people have to check in every single day, have to report some mini wins, express a little gratitude, and just kind of cultivate that awareness and that presence. One thing that I've noticed just watching the scroll this week is that a lot of the people that are in this course, they're typically sharing when something positive happens. So, it's human nature. It's a lot easier to be present when we're in a good mood, when we feel good, when we've done something well. How do you counsel us to cultivate more awareness when we're in pain and when we're suffering, when there's confusion? Right now, the whole world is kind of press pause. And, I've noticed within my own client base, there's a lot of grief, there's a lot of loss. And, the sort of the typical intuitive response to that is to try to move away from it. Mindfulness, I think, is something that would say, let's be here now, obviously. So even when things are uncomfortable, what are some of the tools, techniques, wisdoms to help people not run away from the moment when things get a little bit uncomfortable?
I love that one.
That's a good.
So my experience of this is that people are often a little bit, I think, disappointed sometimes when they get into this part of the work, because I think a lot of people start with this work because they have they get like a mental image of, Tim Ferriss or something, who's this like rock star guy who's incredibly productive. And, I think sometimes we get thoughts in our head, like they don't have struggles, or, it's all about correcting being below the line. Like always, the goal is to always be above the line. And it's my experience of mindfulness and really the way that I teach it. And I think the way that it's like really intended, like, Buddhist principles and everything really intended to be taught, is that it's not actually about changing your state at all. It's about being with, like, there are going to be moments where it literally feels like the world is on fire, and it's okay to have a normal human response to that. And bringing awareness to it, having it be okay, and observing like, oh, okay, I'm taking this thing, that's basically, so in Vipassana, they talk about Vipassana, which is a school of thought with, it's a type of meditation. The way that it's taught is that everything at its basic level is a bodily sensation. That's all it is. If you really boil it down, it's a bodily sensation. And yes, we layer emotional reactions and stories and interpretations and like the impact of whatever the thing is. Like, there are a lot of things that are realities, but really where most of the pain occurs is in our response to it. And so that doesn't mean to not have the response, but it means to be aware of it and not identify with it. So you can, in doing so, you can create a lot of space for, like, the world feels like it's on fire. A lot of really horrible things are happening right now. It's okay to have a response, but it's about not having the response be in the driver's seat. And that's what mindfulness and meditation does, is it takes all of that stuff, which is normal and human and okay, and it just shifts it over into the passenger seat so you can get in the driver's seat. And also gives you a space to feel it and experience it and whatever, but without getting like caught in it. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, that's really great.
Yeah.
That's great. Paul, you want to build on that?
Yeah, I love that. I was going to say, people have to first embrace their humanity, right? We're not perfect beings. We are humans, and humans have emotions, right? And so it's more about acknowledging that. I mean, for some of us, we go through a grief process when we kind of, especially in situations like what we're seeing right now. I mean, the entire world is on pause. There's many people in grief. A lot of people are angry, and you got a lot of people depressed, and so they're in different stages. But, I think it's okay to acknowledge that, but then you create the space to be able to say, okay, this is all going on around me, but what do I notice that's positive, or what's the learning here that I can take away from all this? What's a way I could respond that would give me a different outcome, right? And so it's being able to create those choice points, and one, we have to get in touch with what the emotional states that we are having, but not get attached to them. I would say that, from a physiological perspective, emotions drive our physiology, right? So depending on our emotional state, our physiology is going to have a reaction, and it's going to happen non-consciously below our awareness. And so mindfulness helps us create choice points, right? It's about creating enough awareness and presence to see what is my emotional state, or what's going on with me right now, what's going on around me, and what's my reaction. Well, let me pause for a second. How could I react differently to give me a different result, maybe, or a different outcome, or just I won't feel as angry about this thing if I look at it this way, but being able to get in the moment, present, and then see, okay, what choices do I have that I can make? Or do I just let this thing kind of go and be a victim of it almost? So embrace the humanity and just and try to create choice points.
That's excellent. Since Lauren touched a little bit on Vipassana, can you share just maybe in a nutshell what transcendental meditation is, just so that our viewers have an idea of these two different styles?
Yeah, well, it's really interesting because they're very similar in that. So when you get in transcendental meditation, you learn that you're not trying to stop the mind. The mind is it's trying to get down to whatever level it is and think and process information. And when we get into a space where we're trying to stop it, we're actually fighting the process that the mind is trying to go through naturally. And so you allow the mind to go where it's going to go. And in transcendental meditation, you transcend multiple layers of consciousness to get to unified consciousness, unified field. Every time you have a thought, that thought is the release of energy or the release of emotions that you're processing, which you could be processing for the last few minutes or last hour or for the last 10 years. So you don't know, depends on what the thought is, but you're not assessing the thought just comes up. And then you realize it, and you go back to, and we have a mantra. So you go back to your mantra, and the mantra is just a thought, just like any other thought that anybody would have all the time. It's like people are having thoughts right now. They're thinking about the glass of wine they want to have after this phone call. So there's always a thought, right? So, so the mantra is the same thing, and you don't really try to force the thought. It just happens naturally. And so it's a very easy. It's kind of, you flow into it. You realize that you may not be thinking the mantra, and you come back to the mantra. And then if you have another thought, you say, hey, that's another thing. Great. And that release of emotion or energy is supposed to happen. And it's good, because that means your brain is processing that and it's starting to relax and recover. Right. And that's, so part of the meditation process is so that your body can recover and restore itself.
Well, that's a great segue to the question that I had next. And, I'm just thinking about the people who are in our program right now, and they made it to day 5. And in my experience, doing kind of these 30-day models, or if I'm coaching with people, I've noticed that maybe days, 5 to 8 end up kind of feeling a little plateauy, a little like a slog. There's that initial high, like I'm trying something new. And then, it's, oh, here we are again. It's kind of lost its luster to some degree. For people to, and as you said, Lauren, this is like self-interest. I mean, this ultimately ends up being something that's helpful and good for people to do. The buy-in is not always the easiest thing. I'm wondering a little bit about under the hood in terms of the physiology. So it's one thing to say, hey, I did my practice today, and oh, hey, yes, I didn't, hook to that thought. I actually kind of stayed in the moment. What's going on inside of us for, when we're able to kind of cultivate that kind of awareness? What's going on in our brains? What's going on in our bodies? And how does that show up, in generally speaking in our lives?
Mm.
Paul, you want to give that one a crack?
Sure. So I would say, a couple things. So as we're trying these different, techniques, interventions, and like you said, we in the beginning we kind of get this high about, we're going to try this new thing, we're going to get involved, and we get really excited about it. The plateau is usually around, why am I doing this? Am I doing this just to participate, or am I doing this because I first understand the benefits of how it's going to help me, but I'm noticing something different in myself. And I think everybody hits the plateau. So it's not like nobody's going to hit the plateau. We all hit the plateau. It becomes part of that, ability to kind of grit. We've kind of learned some things. So if I'm doing this, I'm going through the motion. It comes back to, I think something Lauren said in the beginning. It's like, well, why are you doing this? Like, what's the real reason that you're doing this? And when you accomplish this thing, when you go through this process, what's the expectation? What are you hoping to achieve? And I think getting very crystal clear on that helps people break through. So it's almost like having a purpose. The purpose for doing this is to, if we're trying to get into a state of peak performance, we might do that, we may not. If we can become just a little bit better and a little bit more aware so that we can make better choices, that might be an easier thing to grab onto. So it might be where people are putting their goals versus what's more realistic and more practical for the time frame that we're going to do this in. So I think I love the setup that we have here, because it's not about peak performance, but it's an optimal performance. It's about the little things and noticing how we can become a little bit better and a little bit better, and notice it. And then we have a win, and then we notice, okay, this is what I did. So I'll do that again. So it becomes repeatable. So it's the purpose. It's the noticing the wins, and they're small. So they don't have to be giant steps, but really small steps. And then that typically will help people, or get people a little bit more engaged in the process, right?
Thank you.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and I think also one of the things, like, to take it a step further too, I think oftentimes, we sign up, regardless of whether it's meditation or, signing on with a coach or a new course you're doing, everything sounds nice in the beginning before you start. I think Brene Brown has this saying, she's like, you can't skip day 2. Like day 1's all bright and shiny, like, yay, this thing's gonna happen. And then day 2 sucks. And then day 3, is when all the breakthroughs happen. And I think it's like, when you identify your why, keep asking yourself, why is that important? Why is that important? Because it's like, peak performance sounds lovely, but when things get really hard, it's also easy to talk ourselves out of it. Like, I'm fine. I don't know if I need it anymore. That's all right. It's not that important. We kind of talk ourselves out of it.
Yeah.
And actually continuing to ask yourself why until you hit something that gets you. So I think for a lot of people, I coach a lot of people around physical fitness and health mindset. Cause also, Paul, I have to connect with you at some point about everything you're doing, like the functional fitness. We have a lot in common, but, continuing to ask why until something hooks you. So, a good example is weight loss. Well, I want to look good in a bathing suit. Okay, what else? Keep going. And then it's like the moment someone starts talking about being able to make it, to the point where they can take care of their kids more effectively in old age, that is something that will keep you going past day 7, 8, 9, 10. And so knowing yourself when it's big enough to be actually motivating to pull you through the uncomfortable part. And also, Damon, I wanted to make sure I got the second part of your question, because you also asked about the science. Were you asking about the brain science of what's happening with mindfulness, or the brain science of a habit? What did you want us to speak on?
More about mindfulness, and when we were able to cultivate the practice of mindfulness, I mean, we're really big on nervous system and
Yeah.
finding ways to become more alert, more calm, and just in general, kind of getting out of that sympathetic state.
Hmm.
Um, I'm wondering about the correlation between a robust mindfulness practice and our ability to activate parasympathetic nervous system,
Oh man.
and just in general to be able to kind of, as Paul said, to have the clarity to know what your values are in chaotic times, right? I mean, to me, that's kind of where that's the juice. Like, not only can I remember to do it, but also can I remember to kind of tack in the direction that I've already kind of established for myself. But what's going on inside of our brain, inside of our body when we're kind of cultivating this mindfulness practice?
Oh my gosh. So a lot.
Yeah.
There's a lot
How much
happening.
time do you have?
Yeah,
How
right,
much time
right.
do we have?
Yeah.
Well, and I heard like a piece in there that's actually something that I'm starting to get curious about and that I need to read. Actually, I need to read more on, but I'll speak to the things that I'm super familiar. Like I'm very
Hmm.
familiar, all grounded in. And a
Hmm.
couple of those are, so my particular training was really in Vipassana, which is very much focused on bodily sensations.
Hmm.
But I also think this is true of most mindfulness practices, is that they actually increase they call it interoception.
Hmm.
So it's like your ability to be in your body and grounded. And most people live their lives, like if you ask them where they are in their body at any given moment, like it's all here up.
Hmm.
Like they're like, I don't even know what the answer to that question is. Like they're completely up here. And because of that, we have all of these physiological responses that are happening kind of outside of our awareness. In that spiral, it's like a positive feedback loop where we have a reaction to something. And because we're not aware of it as it happens, it produces, like, we tell a story and then our body responds and then our brain responds, and it keeps going and spiraling and getting bigger and bigger.
Mm.
And because mindfulness basically moves you back in the process, where the moment your body detects something that's strange, you're able to notice it and stay grounded. It prevents all of that other stuff. Like it prevents all that other stuff from happening, or at least it shortens it, right? So maybe instead of going from A to Z, you go from like A to Q, and maybe the next time you go from A to M or something. Like it just keeps shortening.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one piece.
Mm-hmm.
Another piece is that your prefrontal cortex, which is the part of your brain that's responsible for regulating your attention, your impulse control, there's a whole lot more activity in that part of your brain, and also reduced activity in other parts. So things like your amygdala, your limbic system, that basically means that your emotional reactions aren't quite as large, again, because of that kind of positive feedback mechanism. There are a couple of other really interesting things also, but basically, like, it's a really simple way of just saying it increases the space in between the thing that triggers you and your response just enough that you get to decide what happens in that gap. And that's the important part. Also, Paul, you might actually even know more than I do about the brain science. So if there's anything you want to chime in on.
No, I think you pretty much you hit everything. You really are working out the brain's braking system, right? So you're really helping the prefrontal cortex and the parietal lobe kind of work together, so that you can kind of dampen down the limbic response. You're not changing it per se. You're dampening down the response so you can see the choice point, or see them. It's almost like in heart math, we have this thing where you freeze the frame, right? You actually freeze the frame in the moment, and then once you realize that the frame is frozen, then you kind of listen to your intuition and think, okay, what's the appropriate response to this particular situation? You actually have time to ask yourself a question, and when you actually use language, you come out of the limbic system into the prefrontal cortex and into the language centers, because language doesn't live in the amygdala, right? So if you can get to a point where you can pause and actually ask yourself a question, you're using a different part of your brain to actually formulate the question, which gives you that 0.3 seconds or whatever it is to be able to think differently, or at least choose a different response. I mean, everything is about choice. We can choose to stay in the emotional state that we're in, or we can choose to be in another one. Right? I liken it to like listening to a radio station. I tell people, you wake up in the morning and you're on a station. You need to assess that. And if you don't like the radio station that you're on, then you need to turn the dial. Now, there's a lot of ways you can turn the dial, but first is just recognizing the station you're on. And then if you want to turn the dial, then there's a lot of techniques, mindfulness is one of them that can get you to turn the dial to the new station, right? And that's, choice points.
That's great. That's great. And as all of us that are in this course know, I mean, some of the ways that we turn the dial are, practice our breath, our gratitude practices, moving our body and connecting, with friends, partners, or colleagues. And just as a way to kind of unpack that for why we chose those action steps, really that they're at the center of our ability to kind of change the station, as you mentioned, Paul. And interoception is a really fascinating area as well, where for those of you, I mean, we have, I think, probably 300 data points right now where people have been sharing about their emotional identification throughout the day. And that's really what Lauren, I think, is sharing with us right now, is that when we can kind of press pause and say, okay, how do I feel? And really get granular with it. And really kind of try to define it beyond that ricochet of our reactivity. We're buying ourselves a little time to become more aware. And if, let me know if this sounds like it's off base or not, but it feels like when we then can say, oh, I'm feeling, frustrated, just that the mere fact of us being able to kind of turn and pay attention to what I feel and then where I feel it. Isn't that, in a sense, kind of the essence of being able to cultivate a mindfulness practice and develop those choice points
Absolutely.
that you're mentioning? Cool.
That's a big part of it. I believe, actually, Paul, you did NLI, right? The Neuro Leadership Institute. Is that what you said? Yeah, I think they actually have a practice in that about getting, so you have something happen and they say, like, name it, like name the emotion, because it gets you in your prefrontal cortex.
Name entertainment. The name of entertainment is the saying, but you have an emotional response. If you can name it, then you've created that space at that point. And sometimes, someone says, I'm really angry. Well, you've named it and nothing happens. Well, it's a really strong emotion to be angry. So, but having multiple tools in your tool bag to be able to shift your emotional state, whether it's cognitively or whether it's, from a physiological perspective, and, changing your vagal tone, whichever one it is, or having a coherence practice, whatever it is, but being able to use some kind of intervention to be able to say, okay, I'm angry. I don't want to be angry. So what am I going to do? Well, maybe I'll walk away from this for a few minutes, but then I'm going to do something to mitigate that, right? May not take it down to a 0, but maybe I can take it from anger to maybe level 5 frustration. I'll take that, right? Because that's better than anger. Either way, it's draining you. But would you rather have the faucet all the way on, or would you have it on a slow trickle? Right? You can probably manage a slow trickle better than the whole faucet being wide open.
Yeah. Well, I think also, like, related to that, I think it's very common. Most of us make certain emotions really wrong. Or like anger, I don't want to be angry. I don't want to be sad. I don't want to experience any of these things. So the goal is ultimately like a state break. And that's it. There's nothing wrong with that necessarily, but often people get stuck in it because it's like, well, I shouldn't feel angry, or I shouldn't feel this thing. And when you resist it, it gets bigger and it gets more real. And it's like just giving yourself space where it's like, okay, I'm mad. Like, let yourself be angry for a minute and giving it space to process through, so that then you don't get stuck in it. You can move out of it. And that's what I hear you saying. It's like, it just gives you enough so that it diffuses it just slightly. So you have it, it doesn't have you.
Yep.
Yeah, that's really powerful. Thank you for that, both of you. They seem like small, kind of like nuggets or little kernels, but it feels to me like these are, sort of the pivot points and the shock absorbers that when we start to kind of sprinkle into our lives, how do you help somebody kind of make the jump from, it sounds like both of you are saying that, doing a little practice in the morning is probably the most beneficial. You set that intention in the morning, and that can really kind of carry you through the day, and establishing that structure. How do you help people make that pivot and maybe evolve into, instead of just structuring it, thinking of it in terms of like mindfulness, that they're more living in the ability to, drive in rush hour traffic, be on the train, be in a meeting, boss is yelling at you, kids are going nuts, all the different moments in our lives that typically add that stress. And to your point, Lauren, when we start telling ourselves a storyline, then that's really when the suffering kind of kicks in. It's not necessarily the activity, it's kind of like how we react off of it. Are there some tools or techniques to allow people to kind of sprinkle this throughout their day so that they're never really kind of like falling off the wagon per se?
So I love that question, because I think it's very easy when you start a mindfulness practice for people to, it's like, okay, I'm going to do maybe in the beginning it's 3 minutes, maybe later it's 20, 30, 60. I don't know what it looks like for you, but I'm going to do my thing in the morning and then it's done. And then they go out on throughout their day and it'll have an impact on their life, but the intentionality of integrating it isn't there.
Mm-hmm.
And if you actually, the magic happens when you're really intentional about it.
Mm-hmm.
So, one of the things that I do is I'll literally have, actually, you all are doing gratitude practices which I love, because that can actually be something a tool that you can use to improve mindfulness and presence. And so I have certain clients who have alarms go off on their phone where they say some iteration of what's something you're grateful for, or where are you in your body? Actually, that's a really popular one, especially with women, because it's like I think everyone's in their head, but, and getting you grounded, because so much of the time throughout the day, it's like, what happens? Life gets crazy. You get 700 emails, things are on fire. And suddenly you were super centered in the morning. And then life is kind of taken off, and actually integrating it. So it becomes like a thing, a practice throughout your day. And the more automatic you get about it, the more it'll get integrated into everything. And eventually you don't need alarms on your phone anymore. Other thing, I know you all are doing a bit of breath work. I'm a big fan of breath work. I actually think that they go really hand in hand. And I teach people breathing techniques as kind of like a release valve. If they're at capacity, they're just completely, that moment where you're just like, I can't take anymore. It's like, okay, take 5 minutes, go to the bathroom, do, box breathing, do 4 rounds of box breathing.
Nice.
And just kind of having something to anchor back to, and some sort of incremental, whether it's a phone alarm, or I know that, tying it to an activity. So before lunch, I'm just going to do this for 2 minutes, so that it's not just, because really mindfulness it's not just about meditating. Meditating is great. If that's all you can do, meditate. But it's really something that's intended to be a lifestyle. And the more intentional you can be about I keep using the example of being reactive with a loved one or something, but the more when the pressure's high, when you can use it there, that's when it's really, really powerful. That's when it gives you, as Paul, as you said, when it gives you space to choose, that's where it'll change your life. So yeah. What do you think?
Thank you. That's awesome.
Yeah. I like what you're saying, because I'm going to say sometimes it's really useful to stack, right? So stack your mindfulness practice with something else. So if you know you're doing yoga and you do yoga every single day, right? And it's like clockwork. Okay, maybe you can add your mindfulness practice right after that. You're going to sit in a meditation anyway, so why don't you use that at that moment? If you're going to work out, you're going to work out every single day, or it's every 5 days, then stack the practice right after that. And that's kind of how I do it. That's how what made it really easy for me, was to stack it right after my qigong exercise. But then you also, another thing I do with some of my clients, and actually most of my clients, is I usually have them set an intention for their day when they start off. So they might do their meditation or mindfulness practice, and when they come out of that, there's a practice, there's a gratitude practice. And how do you intend to show up today? And so when they can actually articulate and or journal that particular intention and write it down, right? Then they have something to come back to at lunchtime, in the afternoon at 2 o'clock, and before they leave, the office, or stop the day. We don't leave the office anymore. We're all at home. So, But they can check in at the end of the day and say, how did I do? If my intention was to be this certain way, how did I do throughout the day? And you have opportunities to check back in with yourself. And it's really interesting because we talk a lot about mindfulness and it's being, a lot of people we focus on breath work because the breath is always now, right? It's always happening now. And so that is an easy place to anchor. But I mean, you can get up and take a walk and have a mindfulness practice, depending on where you put your attention. You could do a breathing, like a box breathing, or I use Wim Hof techniques, or many of the other breathing techniques that are out there. I mean, that will change your physiology. Just standing up and doing some brisk movement will shift your state. And if anything to do, you can do to shift your state, then after you finish doing that, okay, where am I? How do I feel? Right? That gets you anchored right back to the body and back to your emotional state. And that puts you in that present moment then or now, right? So so many things we can do, but I think, just the intentionality behind that has to be there. So we can do some intention setting practices to kind of get people to figure out where they want to go on a daily basis, or even if it's, how do I want to show up for this phone call? I mean, that's even a great one. When I have a phone call, how do I want to show up? Well, I got 5 minutes. Maybe I need to change my state. I'm going to do a mindful meditation, or I'm going to do a breathing technique.
That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, we talk a lot here about less about to-do lists and more about to-be lists, where, and to your point, Paul, like, how do we want to show up in our moment? And when we can sort of set our intentions around what we want to, how we want our physiology to be. And you both have mentioned the word state and the ability to change state. This is the 30-day flow program. Flow is a state. Just as kind of a wrap up, do you all have experience with flow? And if so, is there a marriage between mindfulness and flow? I mean, obviously there is in some regard, but if you could just share maybe just a little bit as we wrap up here about how mindfulness connects to flow, and as that's sort of the big umbrella around this challenge that we're doing right now. And but I think sometimes it gets misunderstood or mislabeled as something that is peak or adventure Red Bull athletes hucking off mountains. And as it turns out, the research really is the greatest place we enter into flow is in good conversation. So just curious if you have a story or two around mindfulness as it relates and connects to flow.
So I think the thing that comes to mind for me is it's interesting. I studied flow in graduate school, and I'll lay my cards on the table. I'm not super up to date on it, but like the most recent research. But my experience of it, and really the way that I've seen it show up with mindfulness and meditation, is that I think mindfulness and the ability to cultivate your presence gives you the space to stop resisting everything so hard. So I think oftentimes people talk about flow and it's like this optimal state, and it is. Like, I think a lot in an ideal world, that is exactly what it looks like. And it can also occur in the face of challenging emotions or like challenging circumstances. The thing that often gets in the way, has the challenging circumstances or emotions get in the way of the flow, is not the circumstances and emotions, it's the way we are about them. It's how they come up and we fight. And we're like, I don't want it to be like that. And then it gets everything's like clunky and it has all this resistance, and we have a hard time getting in the flow. So really the place that I've seen it in my own life and for other people has really been in that spot of like, okay, things can be easy. Even when there are challenges, speaking of like being in your state, you can come from a being in a state of ease and surrender and flow that will allow you to re-enter a flow state, even in the midst of the crazy. And it's funny, yesterday or a couple of days ago, I had a kind of an experience with this. So everyone in the world is on Zoom right now, right? Zoom is like the best place to work. If you haven't bought Zoom, you don't have Zoom stock with Zoom, now is the time to buy it. And I was probably one of 7 billion people on Zoom, and I was on a conference call, and it was about to, it kept dropping. It kept kicking me off.
Mm-hmm.
And normally, like a few years ago, my response would have been to get really ticked off
Mm-hmm.
and complain about my computer. And I was just like, okay, maybe I just need to get outside and take the conference call from my phone. And so I ended up on this walk on this beautiful road in Florida, and like by the water, and was just like, and I was walking, I was like, wow. And it was absolutely, and I didn't realize it until now, but it was 100% a flow state. And the only reason that I was able to access it is because I had something come up in the moment, and I was just like, what if this was just easy? Like, what if I just rolled with this? And I think that that's a choice that we all get to make. And granted, getting kicked off Zoom is a relatively minor thing, but that's my flow.
Yeah. Love it. Thank you. It's awesome.
Yeah.
Take us home, Paul.
That's an awesome one. That's an awesome one. Similar story. I had I actually shared it on the wall yesterday in my wins. I hit a little micro flow state and doing some creativity. And I think what the mindfulness practice does for me, it's a meditation, it's really about being able to notice when you're in the struggle. I think that's the thing, right? Because when the struggle is that phase right before you surrender to that, and that's when you get into the flow state. And so one is having a little bit of understanding of the flow formula, if you will, but then when you can see, you notice I'm in the struggle. So I know immediately in that point, okay, I need to change my environment, I need to change my physiology at the same time. So that might be a walk, that might be some exercise, that might be turning on some really crazy music and getting into a different mental state with that, and then come back to it and just breathe, and then it just comes out, right? And so it's about noticing the struggle, right? Because a lot of times we go through the struggle and we just we're struggling, we get really frustrated, and then we don't even know we're on the verge of getting into a flow state. I mean, it's like the plant is coming up, and it's like to break through the surface, and then we give up, and then and get mad at it, and it just goes right away, and we never really get there. And it's like we're right on the verge of it, and it's like, notice where you are. Okay, I need to let this go right now and do something different. Change the state, change the environment, change physiology, and then you can come back to it, and it just starts coming out. And I had that experience yesterday for about 2 hours, and so I was excited about that because it's been a couple of weeks. So, so I felt good about that. But it's just a matter of seeing it and realizing it, and not judging it, over analyzing it. It's like, okay, I'm in struggle. I need to do something different now.
I love how you just kind of tied the essence of the whole hour in these last couple of stories, and like really noticing where we are, regardless of what that feels like. Being completely present in that moment allows us to create a little bit of that space to potentially kind of change the channel or change the storyline. Here in our program, we really emphasize the front end and the back end of flow. Like, we want to struggle more effectively and recover more efficiently. And I think that mindfulness is just sort of like it's the sun in the midst of all of that. So, really kind of bringing our attention into the present moment, regardless of what the present moment is giving to us, is going to give us that internal locus of control where we then potentially have that choice. So to our audience, as we kind of go into the weekend, continue to cultivate that presence, whether you call it mindfulness, whether you call it TM, whether you call it Vipassana, being in the moment is really, that's the ultimate goal, and doing your best to kind of not judge so much what the moment is giving you. Dr. Lauren Borden and Paul McFadden, thank you so much for your wisdom, and really appreciate you spending time here today with us. I was in flow for a lot of that conversation, so I thank you so much. I appreciate it. And we'll, if you're okay with it, if we get some Q&A on the recording, maybe we'll share some of those questions with you, and maybe post this event, we can kind of unpack some of the questions that our team has. But I want to appreciate both of you. Thank you so much. And I also want to share a quick little shout out for Scott, who is in this moment going through some of, what all humans have to do, and that is to help his father-in-law who is in hospice right now. And mindfulness is, as well, is a really important part of being present for some of the more poignant and powerful experiences that we have in our lives. So, try to bake this into everything that you're doing, and try not to judge whether something is good or bad. And thanks so much, everybody. I really appreciate it. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
All right.